They say the smallest moments can wake up the biggest truths. I never thought asking my son to help fix the kitchen sink would bring up feelings in me that I hadn't felt in years. Feelings that scared me and mixed me up. There's something about quiet afternoons, shared spots, and the quiet between words that can change everything. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far our little story goes. The house was really quiet that afternoon. Outside, the sky was a dull, cloudy grey, the kind that makes everything feel a bit softer and slower. I had just finished folding the last bunch of laundry when I heard the steady drip from the kitchen sink again. It had started a few days ago. Just a slow, steady tap that echoed off the tile in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I could have called a plumber. I should have. But instead I called Michael. Could you come by for a bit? I asked him over the phone, trying to keep my voice easy. The sink is leaking, and I thought maybe you could look at it before I get someone in. Sure, Mom. Be there in an hour, he said. Michael had always been the type who likes to fix things. Calm and careful. The kind of guy who doesn't hurry. He'd moved out almost 10 years ago, started his own life. But he still came over sometimes, helping with small things I couldn't do alone. Every time he walked through that door, taller and stronger than the last time, I felt a weird mix of pride and something else I couldn't name. I changed into something comfy. Just a loose white shirt and soft jeans. No makeup, just lip balm. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Not really. He got there just as the wind started blowing outside. His being there filling the doorway with a quiet sureness. Still the same sink from when I was a kid, he said with a little smile, putting down his tool bag. I smiled, still stubborn as ever too. We went into the kitchen, and he bent down in front of the cabinet under the sink, his head disappearing inside while his hands moved with a plan. I stood close by, leaning against the counter, watching how his shoulders moved as he worked. Pass me the wrench, he asked without looking. I handed it to him, our fingers touching a little. It was nothing, a simple touch, but I felt it. Just the tiniest spark. I told myself it was the cold metal of the tool, or the chill in the air, or maybe just my mind playing tricks. But something in his eyes when he looked up at me. It wasn't the usual quick look. You okay? He asked softly, seeing I paused. Yes, just a little tired, I replied, pushing a strand of hair behind my ear. He nodded and went back to the sink, tightening the part with easy skill. I remember when this place used to be full of noise, he said, voice quiet under the cabinet. You always had music on, and I was running around barefoot, chasing the dog. I laughed. You never wore socks. Drove me crazy. He sat up, wiping his hands. With a rag. It's quiet now. There was a pause. A long, heavy pause. It is, I said, too quiet sometimes. He looked at me then, not just looked, but really saw me. I wasn't just his mother in that moment. I was a woman alone in a too quiet house. And the way he looked at me made something tight and low in my belly. I hated that I felt it. Hated that I noticed how grown he was. How much his face looked like his father's. Strong jaw, tired eyes, lips that pressed together when he was thinking hard. I turned away, keeping busy with a tea kettle. Want some tea? I asked, putting cheer in my voice. Sure, he said quietly. I could feel him watching me as I moved around the kitchen. It was small, but there the weight of his gaze was clear, and I didn't hate it. That was the part that made my stomach twist. We sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising between us in lazy curls. The tea was hot, comforting, but my hands shook a bit as I held the mug. I kept the talk light. Work, the weather, the neighbor's loud dog. But something had changed. There was a strange feeling in the room now. A tension I didn't know what to do with. Michael reached out suddenly, brushing something from my cheek. A crumb, a loose hair. You had something there, he said. His voice low. His touch stayed just a moment too long. Thanks, I whispered. Another pause, a longer one. His hand rested briefly on mine. It was warm, familiar, too familiar. I pulled back, not hard, just enough to let him know I noticed. Michael, I know, he said before I could finish. I shouldn't have. No, I said, shaking my head. You didn't do anything wrong. It's complicated. He nodded, staring down into his mug. The clock ticked loudly above the stove. A dog barked far away, and for a moment I felt like the world outside had gone away, leaving only the strange, fragile quiet between us. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He paused before opening it. If you need anything else, just call me. I will, I said, voice steady now. Thank you, Michael. He gave me a long look, one filled with questions neither of us dared to ask, and then he was gone. I stood in the doorway, long after the sound of his car faded. I didn't know what came next, but I knew something had changed. The next morning, the house felt different. Not in a way you could see or touch, just a small change in the air, as though something had been stirred that couldn't be put back. I went about my usual stuff. Coffee, morning news, sweeping the porch, but my thoughts kept going back to Michael, to his eyes, his touch, that quiet moment at the door that had felt like a question left without an answer. I told myself I was thinking too much, that it was just being alone playing tricks on my feelings. I'd been alone for years after all. My ex-husband had remarried. My friends were busy with grandkids or trips. And Michael, well, he was the one who still showed up. The only one who still looked at me like I wasn't fading into the background. That afternoon, I baked banana bread. It was one of those little habits that made me feel good. Measuring, mixing, the warm smell of cinnamon filling the house. I wasn't planning on seeing him again so soon, but as I pulled the golden loaf from the oven, the phone rang. Hey, Michael. Sighed. I was thinking, maybe I should come back and check under the sink. Just make sure it's really fixed. I paused, my heart skipping. You don't have to do that. I'm sure it's fine. I want to, he said, his voice low. If you don't mind. I didn't mind, and we both knew it. This time, he arrived just before sunset. The sky outside was streaked with warm orange and purple, and the kitchen lights cast a soft glow over the counters. He looked a little more dressed up than usual. Dark jeans, a buttoned shirt, and it made something flutter in my chest. I greeted him with a smile and held up the plate of banana bread. You're just in time. Smells like home, he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. His eyes met mine for a second too long. We sat again at the kitchen table, but this time closer. The talk came easier now. Memories of his childhood, stories from his job, small laughs over the burnt edges of the bread. I caught myself watching his hands as he talked, the way he moved them gently, the veins that traced his arms. I looked away quickly, ashamed of my own thoughts. After a while, he stood and went toward the sink, opening the cabinet again. Still dry, he said, glancing over his shoulder. But I'll tighten the seal just to be sure. I moved behind him without thinking, looking over his shoulder, my hand resting lightly on the back of his arm. You always were the fixer, I said. He turned his head and suddenly our faces were too close. My breath caught. You okay? He asked, again softly. I should have stepped back. I should have changed the subject, but I didn't. I don't know what this is, I said, voice barely a whisper. But something shifted. He straightened, standing to his full height, and we were nearly chest. to chest. Now the space between us felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I felt it too, he said. Since yesterday. I looked into his eyes, those familiar eyes that had grown from boy to man, and yet still held that unspoken tenderness I'd seen in him as a child. But now it carried something else. Something complicated. Something real. I stepped back, needing to breathe. This can't happen, I said, my voice trembling. It's wrong. It's confusing, and we can't go down this road. He didn't argue. He didn't try to reach for me again. He just nodded, the hurt showing across his face like a shadow. I get it, he said. I do. Silence hung between us like fog. He picked up his tool bag. I walked him to the door again, but this time there were no lingering looks, no gentle touches. Just a heavy, aching quiet. I'll give you space, he said as he stepped out onto the porch. Maybe that's for the best, I whispered. But as I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, pressing my forehead to the cool wood. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I had drawn the line, and yet the memory of his closeness stuck to me like the smell of banana bread. In the air, I didn't know what I wanted. Only that something inside me had cracked open, and it wasn't going to close so easily. The days passed slowly, each one carrying a quiet weight. I tried to stay busy, gardening in the backyard, cleaning out closets, even starting a new puzzle on the dining room table. But no matter what I did, my thoughts always went back to that moment in the kitchen. That closeness, that look. I told myself it would fade. That time would smooth it over like it had done for so many other confusing parts of my life. But this wasn't fading. If anything, it stuck around more stubbornly, wrapping itself around my thoughts when I least expected it. When I saw his favorite cereal at the store, or heard a song he used to play on the old stereo, or walked past the now perfectly quiet sink. Then one evening, as the sky turned the color of wet ash and rain tapped against the windows, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't dressed for company, just a soft grey sweater and leggings. Barefoot, hair loosely pinned up. I opened the door carefully, and there he was. Michael. His jacket was wet from the rain, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his expression hard to read. Hi, he said, voice low. My heart stuttered. Hi, Dot. I know I said I'd give you space, he continued. And I meant to. But I couldn't stop thinking, not just about what happened, but about you. I stepped aside without words and he entered slowly. The air between us shifted again, that familiar hum of something unspoken. He took off his wet jacket, draping it carefully over a chair. I'm not here to make things harder, he said gently. But I don't want to pretend this doesn't exist. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. So I poured us both some tea. Because sometimes routines are the only thing holding the pieces together. We sat in silence for a moment, the warm mugs between our hands. The rain whispered against the roof. The lamp above the table flickered softly. I've been asking myself, he said finally, why this feels so different. Why being here with you feels right in ways that scare me. I looked down, focusing on the swirl of steam rising from my cup. Maybe it's loneliness, I said, more to myself than to him. Maybe we're both just filling some empty space. He shook his head slowly. It's not just that. I've dated. I've had relationships. But I've never felt as safe or understood as I do when I'm here with you. The honesty in his voice was surprising. I shouldn't feel this way, I whispered. You know that. I know, he replied. But feelings don't always ask permission. The ache in my chest grew heavier. I hated how much I wanted to reach for his hand. How I kept remembering the warmth of his fingers on mine. How badly I needed something. Anything. To feel real again. I'm not asking for anything, he said, leaning forward slightly. I just needed you to know. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. I looked away, ashamed. Why now? I asked. Why? This moment in our lives? I think he said. It's because we've both been walking around half asleep, and maybe this woke us up. I let out a soft, shaky breath. It feels like we're standing at the edge of something. And I don't know what happens if we step forward, Dot. Then we don't, he said quietly. We sit here, and we breathe, and we talk, and we figure it out without fear, without pressure. Just truth. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised was gone. Sitting in front of me was a man, a kind, steady, hurt man. And I realized I wasn't just sad about the boundaries we'd never meant to cross. I was sad about all the years I'd spent not being seen. Not like this. He didn't touch me. He didn't move closer. But in that stillness, I felt something shift again. Not desire this time. Not confusion. Connection. Real, painful, beautiful connection. We sat there until the rain stopped. Until the air smelled like wet earth and tea leaves. Until the silence no longer felt heavy, but healing. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door again. This time his hand brushed mine, slow and soft. I'm here, he said. Whenever you're ready. Then he left. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Just unfinished, like the story was still being written. The morning after Michael's visit, the world felt softer. The sun streamed through the curtains, warm and golden, lighting up the kitchen in a way that made the shadows look gentle instead of lonely. I stood, barefoot at the stove, stirring oatmeal, not really paying attention, thinking about everything and nothing all at once. For the first time in years, my heart didn't feel closed off. It didn't feel numb. It felt open, vulnerable, yes, but alive. Over the next few days, Michael didn't call and I didn't reach out either. Not because I didn't want to, but because we both seemed to understand that space was necessary, that we needed time to make sense of what had been stirred between us. Not just the moment in the kitchen or the night in the rain, but the quiet yearning that had existed underneath our relationship for far longer than we had dared to admit. I took walks. I journaled. I sat with my feelings instead of running from them. And then one Saturday morning, I found myself at the farmer's market. It was one of those early autumn days when the air smells like apples and woods. I wandered the stalls slowly, touching soft scarves, sniffing homemade candles, sampling cinnamon pastries. That's when I saw him, Michael standing at a table of honey jars, talking with a vendor. He looked happy, at ease, laughing about something, eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that always made him look like a little boy again. He hadn't seen me yet. I had a moment to turn and walk away. But I didn't. Instead, I walked toward him. When he noticed me, his smile didn't falter. It deepened. Hey, he said, stepping closer. Wasn't expecting to see you here. I needed fresh air, I said, and maybe a new candle. We fell into step together, weaving through the crowd. It was easy, natural. We talked about simple things, how work was going for him, a new recipe I'd tried, the change in seasons, no pressure, no heavy questions. Eventually we found a quiet bench beneath a tree, its leaves just beginning to turn. We sat there sipping warm cider, watching children run past with sticky hands and bright scarves. I've been thinking, I said, breaking the silence about what you said about feeling seen. He turned toward me, his expression open, patient. I've spent so many years shrinking myself. I continued, being the mother, the caretaker, the background character in everyone else's story. And when you looked at me, Not as your mother, but as a woman. It woke something up in me that I didn't even know was still there. He nodded slowly, saying nothing, just listening. It scared me, I admitted, but it also made me realize how long I've gone without real connection, without honesty, without warmth. I turned to face him fully. You gave me that, even if it was messy, even if it crossed lines we didn't know were there. Michael's eyes softened. I didn't mean to confuse you. You didn't, I said. Not really. You reminded me that I'm still alive, that I can still feel, and for that I'm grateful. We sat in quiet reflection, the wind rustling through the leaves above us. I think we're both searching for something, I said after a while. Not just comfort, but truth. And maybe what we needed wasn't romance or fantasy. Maybe it was just this. Time understanding a mirror. He reached for my hand gently, respectfully. And this time I didn't pull away. His fingers wrapped around mine like they belonged there, but without demand. Just presence. We don't have to define it, he said quietly. We just have to honor it. And that felt right. There was no grand decision, no dramatic ending, just two people sitting side by side, feeling the weight of things and choosing for once not to run from it. We walked back to the parking lot together. When we reached his car, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. I'll call you soon, he said, smiling. I nodded. I'd like that. He drove away and I stood there for a while, watching the leaves dance across the pavement. Something had changed between us. Not something forbidden or dangerous, but something human, something honest. And maybe that was enough. Maybe being seen, truly seen, was the most unexpected and beautiful gift of